What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review episode 2 of season 3 of The Expanse, an episode called IFF. Tonight we had an absolutely fantastic episode. I think it might even be better than the episode that preceded it. But before I get into my review and recap, one of the commenters from last week very rightly pointed out that I failed to mention something very important in my previous video, that the ship that Bobby and Christian escape on at the end of the episode is in fact Julie Mao's Razorback. She is the daughter of Jules Pierre Mao, who's obviously still a very major character in the show. Julie very famously merged with the protomolecule in episode 5 of season 2 and redirected it to Venus, and that episode stands as my favorite episode of the series so far. But the Razorback was a cool plot detail because at one point when Julie was off raising hell around the solar system, her parents were using the Razorback as bait to try and lure her back home, and they threatened to sell it. In any case, it's just yet another detail that ties all these various characters and storylines together. But the reason I like tonight's episode so much is that it had a couple of interesting little character studies that really showed what these characters are made of. And it also features one of the most kick-ass action sequences with the Rocinante that I've seen in the show to date. It's always key for the show to keep those two ingredients in proper balance. My only note of caution about this episode is that they brought a key character from the third book, Abaddon's Gate, forward into the story. And this is something that the show has done in the past where they have too many different characters to work with, so they'll either fold them together or they find a way to bring them forward. And so far it's always been a little clumsy when they try to insert these characters earlier than when they need to be there. It makes the scenes feel like they lack any sense of urgency if they're not tied into the proper context. In any case, I'm talking about the character Anna, played by Elizabeth Mitchell, an actress that I really admire. But for people who have followed the books, they know what a major character she becomes in the third book. So it'll be interesting to see how they put her to use until the events of that book begin to be incorporated into the show. And the reason she's been brought forward is to help some of the people write some speeches on Earth to justify the current war. And in exchange for some money for one of her pet projects, she reluctantly agrees to participate in the short term. The main reason these scenes have some relevance is that we see that Aaron Wright is growing increasingly desperate and increasingly impatient to get the hybrid weapons that Jules Pierre Mao has been developing out in space. Aaron Wright clearly at this point is willing to resort to any method to win the war against Mars. But the main thrust of this episode is this giant chase sequence out in space where a whole hell of a lot is going on. Because on one hand, you have Bobby and Christian on the Razorback, where Christian really seems to be struggling and almost in danger of having a stroke due to the rigors of traveling at such a high speed. As Bobby points out, she can travel at much higher speed standing on her head. However, if they slow down, they very well might get fired upon by some ships from Earth. At the same time, you have the crew of the Rocinante engaging in a pretty fierce debate whether or not to help Bobby and Christian, or if they should just continue on their mission to help Prax's daughter. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I've been a little critical of how this show has handled Bobby, because I feel like Bobby is such a badass character in the books that the show so far hasn't begun to fully capture what a badass she can truly be. But we got a taste of it with a great line of dialogue in this episode where she's talking about what a great pilot can do with the Razorback, and Christian asks her if she's a good pilot. And she says, "No, I'm a Marine. Pilots carry me to kill things." That is the Bobby that I know and love. But realizing they're in a bit of a hopeless situation where Earth wants them dead, they decide to use Bobby's suit to send out an encrypted message to Martian forces. That message is picked up by the Rocinante, and that's when the debate begins. Alex, who is a proper Martian to his core, very rightly wants to rush to Bobby's aid. Naomi's in Alex's corner, but Holden and Amos are pushing back and basically saying that it's physically impossible to save all the people in the solar system that they need to be saving, and that their main priority needs to be trying to save May. As we see on Io, May is coming very close to being experimented upon to be turned into one of those hybrids. And I feel like this is where the show is at its sweet spot, where the characters on the Rocinante face a situation where there's no clear right or wrong answer. We have to weigh the pros and cons of making one of several choices where it's impossible to do the right thing on all fronts, leaving with no easy answers. And I feel like all these characters want to do the right thing. They just don't necessarily agree on what the list of priorities might be. And that is where great drama can truly unfold. We actually see a rare glimpse of Jules Pierre Mao's good side on Io, where he basically talks about how he wants to dismantle the entire hybrid program. He feels like the protomolecule cannot be contained and cannot be controlled. But a doctor explains to him that 6 children that they have in their possession, they have a rare genetic immune deficiency disorder, which basically acts as an inhibitor on the protomolecule. Jules Pierre Mao, rightly or wrongly, is convinced by the doctor, and he agrees to push forward. And we get this really creepy sequence where one child who's already being experimented upon shows off the mutations beneath his skin to May. Back on the Razorback, Christian finally passes out, forcing Bobby to slow down. As soon as she does, missiles are fired on him, but luckily the Rocinante flies in to save the day, and we see some of the most kick-ass maneuvers in space that the show has generated so far in its history. We see how the Rocinante is basically using these torpedoes to run interference, for the Razorback flying alongside it, and whenever a torpedo is about to hit the Razorback, how one of the Rocinante's torpedoes will fly ahead and create an explosion that'll draw the enemy fire. And there's something just truly glorious about watching the Rocinante when it's in combat. I don't know why, but when it's doing its maneuvers and flipping around and shooting its blasters in all directions, it just makes the very geeky inner child of me squeal with joy. But for fans of Amos out there, Amos got a great little hero moment in this episode because as the ship begins its maneuvers, we see that some of the cargo hasn't been properly locked away, and when this hatch opens up, all these tools and weapons, like the worst possible container, they all get unleashed into the cabin and they're bouncing around. Prax's oxygen tube gets dismantled, and Amos basically turns into the world's greatest free climber in order to save him because while the ship is maneuvering, it's sending his body in different directions. So he's either hanging into pulps and hanging on for dear life, or he's scaling along the wall. But Amos obviously is an incredibly jacked, physically intimidating, strong individual. But it was just fantastic watching him maneuver through the ship as his body's being pulled in all these different directions. And also, if you're a fan of Amos, and if you're watching the show, you most likely are, if you want to see more of Amos in action and learn a little bit about his origins, definitely download the novella called The Churn. Periodically, between the books, the authors behind The Expanse will release these very short, condensed, kind of base hits that flesh out the world. Some of them are stronger than others, but I really did enjoy The Churn. So the battle in space ends with an insanely sick maneuver where the Rocinante uses a diversion and flies in and cripples and dismantles the far more powerful, far better equipped Earth ship. The downside is that they've now basically declared war on Earth, which puts them in a very precarious position. But they do manage to rendezvous with the Razorback. They link the two ships up, and Bobby carries in Christian, who's in really rough shape. While Bobby might be a badass Martian Marine, Christian is an aging diplomat, and the episode draws to a close with Christian on the edge of death. So overall, it was quite a thrilling episode. It's so damn cool having the Expanse back in our lives, and it absolutely thrills me knowing that we've got 11 more episodes to go. But here's what's crazy. Starting this Sunday, Westworld Season 2 comes back, so we're going to have a situation where on Sunday nights we have Westworld, on Tuesday we have Legion, and on Wednesday we have the Expanse. If you're a fan of science fiction, appreciate this moment. And as if that were not enough, next week also sees the release of Avengers Infinity War. So we have a situation where it's Westworld, Legion, The Expanse, Infinity War, all within the span of about 4 or 5 days. If you're a fan of science fiction or if you're a fan of escapist entertainment, just soak it in and enjoy it. It's almost like a situation where a surfer finds himself drowning, where wave after wave is hitting them and they can't come up for air. But luckily, we don't have to worry about drowning. We can just enjoy being hit by wave after wave of all this insanely cool entertainment. So I'm definitely looking forward to tackling all of the above on this channel. I greatly appreciate anyone who's watching this video. Please consider subscribing to my channel. And as always, I greatly appreciate the input from anyone from the hardcore Expanse community, because there's so much text and there's so much information related to this franchise, I can't possibly keep track of all of it. But once again, thank you so much for watching. Onwards and upwards.